had an inmate tell me, I said, okay, you want your children back. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get your children back? He said, make sure they have the proper sneakers.
You find in the church, there's the lack of transparency. Again, for the fear of being weak. Mm-hmm. We're often told, you don't talk about that. You don't say that. You got to always confess. But there are times I have to deal with me. And if I continue to suppress it, then I think it's going to help me to suffer some form of mental illness.
I totally agree.
Well, praise the Lord, everyone, and welcome to Shifting Times Podcast. It is so good to have you join us again as we discuss relevant topics from a biblical perspective, yet from a speculative application. So we really want you to understand what God wants for your life. And if you've watched us in the past, you know we've dealt with many issues from marriage and family to even the taboo subject of racism. But today, this is just something that's really keen to my heart, and I love the concept of our conversation today. We're going to be talking about mental health. That's right, because many Christians are finding that they suffer from some sort of mental sickness or mental illness, and it's easy when you're a Christian to just blame everything on the devil. Well, our guest today is Dr. Carlton Payne. And he is going to share with us from his personal perspective on this subject of mental health and how it has become such a problem in the world today. And so we want you to welcome Dr. Payne. Thanks for joining us today, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, Bishop.
It is such a pleasure. You've spoken at some of our health conferences before, and you don't have a lot of time because of the way the programs work. But today, we really want to hear your heart. And the first question I want to ask you is, why has mental health become such an issue in our country and in our culture today?
Basically, in the African-American community, the issue of mental health has always been there. Slavery enacted a greater toll on our people much more than we thought originally. It's like, I use an analogy with my students. It's like two houses, one side by side, and externally, they look the same, but one has been eaten away by termites, the termites of slavery and Jim Crow. And then after the termites were eliminated, the structural damage was never repaired.
Okay. So
then as you see one building deteriorating because the infrastructure is breaking down. And so on the surface, they say, well, after slavery, we looked exactly the same. But no, the infrastructure was not there. And in the human being, it is the belief system.
Okay.
The belief system of Black America was damaged. And so that is why religion is so important, because it strengthens the belief system. And the belief system will get you through a lot of situations that just secular things won't.
Okay.
So if you believe that there's a future, there's a higher power, if you believe that I can get through this, then it'll strengthen your mental health. Also, religion, and the mistake a lot of people make, religion and psychology are not mutually exclusive.
I agree.
Okay? You know the story about the flood was coming,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
the same thing. You know, God's hands works in several different ways, especially even through a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So he inspired professionals to help in different situations.
Okay.
And our job is to create and help foster well-being, a sense of strength, a sense of character, a strength of being able to survive in negative environment. And a lot of times psychology actually works. I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated with how the human mind works. The more I study it, the more I'm fascinated with how it works.
Yeah.
You have and all of us have a marvelous device created by a marvelous designer.
Yes, right.
And gigabytes, megabytes, kilobytes, they pale in comparison to what your mind does every day.
Mm-hmm.
Problem solving, looking at things, how much pressure to put on your foot to walk across the street. This just millions and billions of bytes of information. And your mind is this fantastic device. It thinks beyond what is there.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, we're finding that many people, particularly Christians, when confronted with the issue of mental illness or mental breakdowns, if you will, they tend to always spiritualize it. Oh, the devil's just trying to mess with me. The devil's just trying to hurt me. And in the Pentecostal arena, we really believe in demonic infestation. I mean, it's biblical. Demons enter into individuals and do things. But now I'm discovering more than not, some people actually suffer from bouts of schizophrenia and bipolar behavior. Talk to us a little bit about those particular things because they're very prevalent in our culture.
I totally agree with you.
Schizophrenia and bipolar.
Disorder, yes.
How can what should our audience look for, and then when should they go for help?
You look for extremities, extreme things. Abnormal behavior is simply normal behavior that goes to extremes.
Okay.
For example, all of us have done this. You got in your car on the way to work and you said, did I lock the door? And you might turn around and go back and look. Or I've done this. Did I close the garage door? And I'll go back and look. But a person who has obsessive compulsive disorder, it's almost like a tape that keeps playing over and over again. They'll go and they'll come back and they'll go and they'll come back and they'll come and go and they'll come. They'll check 4 and 5 and 6 times before they realize that. And that's so it's a normal behavior that's been taken to an abnormal level. And that's really what we're looking at. Schizophrenia. The analogy I use with my students is you're in a car and the windows have been blacked out and it's a video is playing. And you can see, if it's a camera on the top of the car, you could still probably navigate. But now if you take the camera and put a video in there and it's a video of a whole different street, and a whole different, you'll be driving on the sidewalk, but you'll think you're driving normally. And that's basically what schizophrenia is. You see the world through totally different eyes in here. And it's adverse to the environment around you. And that's the symptom of schizophrenia. So you look for extreme behaviors, things that is outside of the person's purview. We call it the standard deviation, deviating from normal behavior, or for that person. They're extremely outgoing and all of a sudden they're sullen. Or they're extremely sullen and all of a sudden they're outgoing. Just deviations from what they usually are. And that's a strong indication that you need some kind of intervention. Something's going on. Feeling sad all the time without some kind of external mechanism. Looking at the world through different eyes. Feeling that you can't get through it, or helplessness or hopelessness. Those are indications that you need some kind of intervention. And a lot of times in my field, we look at, it's a saying in my field, the presenting problem is never the problem, okay? What the person brings to you usually isn't what's going on. It's just a symptom of what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. It's almost like violence in the community. People think that, if we put more cops on the street and more cameras and stuff, but violence is really in here.
Yes.
It's a reflection of what's going on in the mind. And so we're looking out here, and we're trying to correct it out here. If we correct it in here, it'll correct itself out there. It's like having a spot on your suit, and you wipe off the mirror. It's not going to do any good. Mm-hmm. You got to go to where the problem is. Yeah. And so that's where it comes from. That's where violent behavior comes from, and that's where a lot of mental health issues come from.
But are you finding in this generation, let's say, when we entered into the age of the Generation Xers, do you find that more mental illness became more prevalent with the newer generations, or the baby boomers and the baby busters, those who were the children of the Depression era parents? Do you find they can deal with life's challenges greater than the younger ones?
Totally agree with you on that. Each generation seems, it's a verse in the Bible, my grandma used to say, the wiser but weaker.
Yeah.
This generation seems to have more issues, more learning disabilities, more psychiatric issues, and it's because they didn't go through the stuff that our generation went through or our parents' generation went through. They have a lot more vulnerabilities. My father used to say when I was a kid that you're sitting at the table waiting for French fries when you should be planting potatoes. And so
That's good.
So he thought our generation had it too easy, but the next
good.
So the next generation. When I was a young counselor, I first got a job working for the family court. I used to do interviews with young people coming in, and I would ask them 2 questions just to kind of get them ready. Who do you live with, and what is your religion? And in the 90s and in the early 2000s, I would live with my mother and I would be Baptist, Catholic, whatever their religion was. A lot of them would say I'm Christian. They wouldn't have any idea I'm Christian. So 10 years later, that all changed. They start saying, I live with my grandmother, and I have no religion. So those foundations changed, and they started seeing the world through different eyes. Here's another one. I would ask a question. I would have a group of maybe 62 or 70 guys, and I would ask a question, what's the most important thing in the world? And the first or second answer they would raise their hand and say freedom, especially in a closed environment. They would say freedom. And I would always get that year after year. This new generation, I don't get freedom. Guess what the word I get now? Money. Money has supplanted freedom as the most important thing to them. So it's worth giving up your freedom if you have money.
To get money.
So those things have changed. The mental faculties are changing. The belief system has changed.
Wow.
Yes.
That's an interesting concept. Jesus talks about money more than he talked about anything else. I mean, money and the kingdom of God were right on the same level for him. Mm-hmm. And Paul talks about that later to Timothy. He says, look, people who want to be rich, avoid them. And I think they understood it could drive you to despair. And it's interesting you say that, because I think that the absence of money, the absence of being rich, as our culture determines, can affect your mind and bring about depression.
I would think so, because especially with social media nowadays, people are seeing what they don't have. Like, I grew up in heart of North Philly, and I have 5 other siblings. We didn't know we were poor.
That's right.
We were just happy. We had a mom and dad, we had a house, we had food to eat. But if you see things on TV and everybody has this fancy car and everybody has these mansions, and I'm being left out. I'm not important. And I think that is one of the detriments of the current society. That people get a sense of power from external things. Our generation and generation before us, they were internally oriented. Mm-hmm. Things like confidence.
Yes.
Those things were important. But now it's external things, gold chains and pit bulls and fancy cars and loud music. That is where people are drawing that sense of power. Power from external. And the key is that what really helps my clients is to make them become more internally oriented. How to develop internal strengths like confidence, self-esteem, courage, things like that. And you start developing those things. Those external things aren't become unimportant.
That's true.
Yes,
that's true. Now, how would you in Christ? We like to wish things away or speak them away, especially with the new Word of Faith movement. I don't have to be bound by this. I can speak it into existence. But how do you deal with unhappiness when a person who says, I'm a believer in Christ, but I'm just unhappy, which can lead to a moment of despair, which then takes them further into anxiety and depression?
Very good.
How do you help them out of that unhappy mode?
A lot of people don't realize this, but the job of a psychiatrist or psychologist is to remove obstacles, barriers to goals. And a barrier can be defined as any problem, real or imagined, that serves as an obstacle to reaching a goal. Our job is to remove the barriers and to identify the barrier. A lot of times people don't know what it is. There's something that's making me sad and I don't know what it is. And one thing that we are very good at is we're listeners. We hear, okay, you're saying this. And sometimes this is called reflection or feeling. You reflect back to the person what they're saying. And they say, did I say that? Yes, exactly what you said. They don't really hear themselves. So if you're listening long enough, and if you're a good listener, you could almost, in every case, tell what the issue is.
Okay.
The client almost never sees it. Okay. But they can tell you what's bringing them down, what's making them sad, what's causing depression, what their belief system is. I remember my grandmother telling me about a story of Doubting Thomas, where he would not believe that Christ had risen until Christ showed him his wounds. But Christ put a special favor on people who believed him without proof. Mm-hmm. And that was the fundamental difference between science and religion. One is they reject, the tenet would be to reject information without proof. And the fundamental tenet of religion was to be accepting without proof, which is called faith.
Yeah.
So the key is to understand how the two are coalescing. God created this. You know, and people think there's two separate things, but they're not. You know, he gave you this body and he gave you this mind. Your brain is basically an organ floating in a mass of spinal fluid. And it can get out of whack just like your heart or lung. And so it's not two separate things. They work together in harmony. And to understand how that mind and brain works and how healthy you can make that thing in order to reach your goal.
Now, see, you just said something that a lot of people can't even comprehend. You said to make my mind healthy. Now, I can make my body healthy. I can omit certain foods. I can exercise. There are things I can do. Take some supplements to make my body healthy. How do I make my mind healthy?
Excellent question. First of all, look at how the mind works. I want you to understand how the mind works. Beliefs impact upon thought patterns. Thought patterns impact upon behavior. Behavior impacts upon your environment. And the thing that impacts upon beliefs are words.
Yeah.
The self-talk that we say to each other. And sometimes we say things to each other you wouldn't believe. People are screaming hard on themselves. Oh, you messed that up. Oh, you did that. Oh, to change the self-talk. They say, this is going to be okay. I'm going to make this. I'm going to get through this. Muhammad Ali was good for that. You know, I'm going to win. Yeah. Nobody's going to beat me. I'm the greatest. Like, saying positive affirmations. And so instead of saying the words that you use, in fact, impact your belief system, which impact your thought patterns, which impact your behavior, which impact your reality. So the key is to change it at the base, to change your self-talk, to change the things that you say to yourself. I'm not prepared to do this. I remember in college, I played college basketball. It was a guy, every time I went to the foul line, he said the same thing. Well, this one's not going in. You know? And it wouldn't go in. If you keep saying that, you know. But it was a guy on the team. I'll never forget this. We were playing against this big school. And the coach comes over to him, and he gets fouled near the end of the game and said, can you drop these 2 foul shots for me? And he looks at the coach and he says, it's in the bag. I said, this guy has ice water in his veins. We're at the Palestra. He goes out. The crowd is like here. It was such a small stadium. He dropped both foul shots and went and sat down. I said, because he believed he could do it.
He could do it.
You know, that was his thought pattern.
Wow.
And he just said he was so confident, you know. And this is a college kid.
Yeah.
With people holding up big signs that say brick on it and waving it back and forth and people booing you. And he just went to the foul and dropped both foul shots. So your self-talk is a very powerful thing. The word, even in the Bible. Yeah. How did Delilah get Samson to reveal where his strength came from? Was it her beauty? No. It was her words. Yeah. And so it came to pass that she pressed him daily with her words until his soul became fixed. My wife does it all the time. My hairdresser quit. My hairdresser quit. Friday, Saturday, I said, woman, take my wallet, take my money.
Yes.
Go, I don't care. Take my credit cards. Go get your hair done.
Go get it.
Okay? I can't take it anymore. The words are so powerful.
Yeah.
And a man was peace in this house. So I said, okay, go get your hair done.
That's true.
And so the words are very powerful.
Yeah.
When sometimes we're going to a concert, my wife and I don't want to drive, take the subway. Guess who's on the subway? My former inmates. Dr. Payne, how you doing? Remember back in 95 when you said the words that you said are still resonating with them. Wow. You know, you said I was going to be okay. You said I was going to get out. You said things were going to get better. You were right. So it's important that the words that you use on other people and on yourself that really help them get to where they want to be.
But now let's get to the nexus of that, though. I mean, are you familiar with the book, The Super Brain?
Yes.
And in that book, Dr. Rudy says, when you speak positively, your brain grows new neurons that enable you to do what you've just spoken. So there's the scientific part. In Mark's gospel, Jesus says, you will have what you say. And when I read that in the book, I saw the marriage between science together, and spiritual things. Yes. And I thought, how dynamic was that? Now, there still must be accompanying works with those positive affirmations. Do you agree?
Exactly. You have to do the work as well.
Yeah.
You know, you can't sit back and wait. I went to school with a bunch of affluent kids, and they were really surprised how things didn't fall in their lap. You know, you had to put the work in.
Yeah.
You know, They would tease me. They would say, "You don't." They would drop me off after school, and no trees on my street. There's no trees on your entire street. You live in the hood, you know. Yeah, but I'm not gonna stay in the hood forever, you know. Right. And they lived in the suburbs, but when we got older, they wondered why things didn't fall in their lap. I don't know why things not going. How are things going better for you? I said, I put the work in. I knew that you had to go after it. Yeah. You know, it's just not. So, like you said, the work creates the results. So you got to you can have the goal. You could develop the neurons, but you have to put the work in order to get where you're going.
And I see that you gave a lot of your time to the Philadelphia prison system.
Yes.
What was the thing that you found that was very obvious when you spoke to the inmates? That's something that they all had in common that was extremely obvious to you as that psychiatrist.
What I found was a lot of them they needed that male role model. Ah. They even when I was younger, they kind of looked at me as a dad. That dad that wasn't there. The one that said, you know, this is how you do it. This is how a man walks. They wanted to know what a man does, you know? And I think that's something that could really help our community is to clearly define manhood. Mm-hmm. In some African countries, Manukbo went through this. They have something called manhood training. At age 13, you're circumcised. You have to run 2 miles into the desert. You have to live 3 and 4 days off the land. And if you pass your manhood training, from that point on, you are seen as a man. You can get married. You can live in a house. You eat with the adults, and from that point, you are seen as a man. Mm. If you do not pass your manhood training from that point on, no matter how old and gray you get, you're still seen as a child. So in this country, we have to clearly define what manhood is, you know? So I'll clearly define them. How to get a job. Oh, what did you put on a resume? What to do with a job interview? How to take care of your children. I had an inmate tell me, I said, okay, you want your children back. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get your children back? He said, make sure they have the proper sneakers. I said, young man, how about food, clothes, bed? That's what the father provides. I never thought of it, that Dr. Payne. So the basic tenets of being a man is what I taught. Even along with the therapy, I taught them the basic principles of being a man, you know, what a man does, how a man thinks, you know. You don't get a prize for taking care of your children. That's true. That's what a man normally does, that's you know. True. Oh, I never thought of that. Yeah. How not to put your hands on your woman, yeah. Okay? Dr. Payne, you don't hit your woman? No. Interesting story. I said, there's a million ways you can get your woman to do what you want, and none of them is putting their hands on it. Right. And they would, how? Okay? And I told them about an old professor of mine. Mm-hmm. I did my internship at Byberry State Hospital. I'm going to let you know how long I've been in this business. And I got a psychiatrist, black psychiatrist, brilliant guy. And he was from Senegal, Africa. And he told me, I would sit at my desk. I was a rookie. And every day, a different, beautiful woman would come in and bring him his lunch. So I'm 22. Doctor, what's the secret? I had a pad and pen. I'm a young guy, right? He said, okay, I will tell you. I will tell you the secret. I said, oh, there is a secret. Yeah, sit down, I will tell you. I said, okay. He said, whatever I tell you to do, you must do it. You must promise me you'll do it. I said, okay, I'll do it. He said, promise me. I said, okay, I promise. He said, you must wash her hair. Mm. I said, wash her hair. A woman will do anything you want if you wash her hair. He said, her mother was most likely a woman. Her hairdresser is most likely a woman. You are a man. You have strong fingers. Wash her hair slowly, firmly, sensuously. She will fall madly in love with you. She will follow you around the house, and she will bring you food. That's what he told me. So when I left the hospital that day, I said, I'm nobody's hairdresser. I'm not doing that. So I was dating this girl at the time, and she lived out in the suburbs, and her parents had something that I didn't have, a garage. Mm-hmm. So I would pull my little raggedy car in the garage and wash it and wax it, and we'd take her out. And back then, I tell the young people, we used to get dressed up, take our girls out back then, you know. So I was walking past, and I didn't have a rag, so I was walking past the bathroom, and there she was in the bathroom washing her hair. I said, why not? I'll go in there. She said, what are you doing? I said, let me do this, baby, right? So I start washing her hair the way slowly, the way he said. Guess what she started doing? You have strong. I said, his name was Dr. Ben. I said, Dr. Ben knew what he was talking about. He knew what he was talking about. So I went back down to the garage. Now, she never came in the garage, spider webs on that stuff. She comes down to the garage and she says, I brought you a sandwich. And she brought me some food.
Wow.
He was right.
Wow.
You know? So it's how you treat your woman. You know? A man shares his strength. He doesn't dominate. He shares his strength with his woman. So I would teach those kind of things to the inmates, you know? Yeah. And all these are mental, like you said, neural pathways. Neural pathways are like Philadelphia. Northbound train, southbound train, L train, east and west. But New York has northbound A train, B train. So if you start developing multiple neural pathways, just like the subway, you can get anywhere in your mind very quickly. And the difference between a person with an average IQ and an advanced IQ is speed, processing speed. Yeah. So you can get, I went from Madison Square Garden to Harlem in a cab. I was speaking at a bookstore there. And it took forever in the cab. Yeah. On the way back, one of my colleagues said, no, come with me. We went down the subway. We were at Madison Square Garden in 2 minutes.
Right.
That neural pathway. So say you do that here mentally. You can get to solution, problem solving very quickly if you have more neural pathways developed in your mind. Wow. So I encourage that you develop those things, you know? Look at things with different eyes.
That's good. Yes. But why are we as a people, African Americans, why are we so resistant to psychotherapy and mental assistance from a doctor outside of our own world?
There is one thing I run into all the time, and that is I dare not show weakness. Oh. You know, our people are just, we are authorities on everything. You know, we know, I know how to do that. I know how to solve that. They seek power because we traditionally have been powerless. You know, how was power traditionally expressed in this country, a sense of power? And it was, money, position, title, and we were denied those things. We were given the title of underling, So we started gaining a sense of power through other things, clothing, gold chains, we started doing external power. So to seek mental health, that's showing that I have some kind of vulnerability, and I can't do that. I have to give a presentation of strength and power. And I find that, especially among the males, I call it the macho layer. In order to get through therapy therapeutically, I have to get through that macho layer. Then I can't. The worst word a man could say in a prison setting is, I was afraid. The guy said in session he was afraid, and everybody gasped. What? He said he was afraid. Now, fear is a normal human response. It's that, there's danger, and it's not a horrible thing. Oh, no, you cannot say that. You better not ever say that, So get through that macho layer, and you can really get some things done. And the bad part is there is in social media is a bunch of amateur, I call them, they call themselves life coaches. Yeah. That bring back those old stereotypes. A man should never talk about his feelings. They're actually saying that online, That's the biggest thing I have to deal with in session. They get you, because they talk about what they do and how they do it, rather than what they believe and what they do, rather than how they feel. And that's how you get guys who do crazy stuff, because they store these feelings up and they put them in the closet, and then one day when something happens, the closet bursts open and they do something crazy. So the key is to let those feelings out. And sometimes I can get them to start, and once they get those things out in session, they'll tell me, oh, doctor, I felt so good. I was never able to say that, And so you let those things out, and it empties. It's going to come out one way or another. It's going to come out as heart issues, it's going to come out as high blood pressure. I'd rather come out as words and tears. Right. And then let it go. Right. It's retaining it and holding it that weighs you down. So that's what I do in session. Let them come. Let that come out. Now, a group of women, I have 15 women. As soon as I sit down, they start crying. It comes out. They tell you how they feel. Men are just they won't let. They've been indoctrinated and trained that you don't show feelings. You're not supposed to. So in session, when they're able to do it, they absolutely love it. Wow. Yes. That's
interesting. You find in the church there's the lack of transparency. Again, for the fear of being weak. Mm-hmm. We're often told, you don't talk about that. You don't say that. You got to always confess, mm-hmm. The positive and the good things of God. But there are times I have to deal with me, things that I don't like about me. And if I continue to suppress them, then I think it's going to help me to suffer some form of mental illness.
I totally agree with that. You start to break down.
I can't just keep putting up that facade.
If you keep putting air in the tire, it's going to explode sooner or later. You know, a lot of people they call it sucking it up. I suck it up, or I walk past it. You know, and they never deal with the issue. And I agree with that. In my mother's church, I had to really kind of step in and kind of do some counseling sessions because they were not looking at the issue. For example, I had a couple, and the only reason I say this is I asked them permission if I could talk about that. He was working midnight to 8, and she was working 8 to 4. And they wonder why they weren't communicating. You know, I said, you don't see it? You know, you come home and she's gone, you know? And I never thought of it that way. No, you don't see each other. Or he would come in and he would sleep on the sofa because he'd be tired, and they would see it, and they wonder why they weren't communicating. So sometimes it takes that third person to look at the situation and make a map as to how you can make things better, you know? And it's called harvesting your mate, looking at what you have there and how to make it better, you know?
That's good. That's good for people to actually sit down and communicate.
Exactly.
We're afraid to do that. Again, I think it's cultural. We don't do a lot of that. I grew up in a home. My father was from Jamaica and my mother was from Georgia. And so my brother and I used to always say it was the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Daddy comes up in a world where the woman does not talk back to the man. The woman, you know, she submits to his lordship. Mama's a Southern girl. You know, she's one of 5 sisters. I mean, 4 sisters. She's not going to take stuff. And so we grew up watching these two cultures come together, and a lot of silence in my home between the parents.
I agree.
A lot of communication with the kids, but between the parents, there was a lot of silence. Now we have people who are coming to Christ, and they still have that inside of them. The Bible talks about one anothering, you know, encourage one another, edify, so forth and so on. But that particular absence is keeping them from the one anothering, which hinders the growth of the church and the people in the church. How do we get them to break that mold and begin to become more communicative?
By being realistic, okay? One key is to get the client to actually be honest about their strengths and then, more important, their vulnerabilities or their weaknesses. I had a guy who was 7 foot tall, inmate. He was 7 feet tall. And I still knew the coach at LaSalle on the team. And I said, "Are you having any physical problems?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, why are you in prison? You know, I could get you a tryout at LaSalle." And he said, I don't like. I don't have to like basketball. You're 7 feet tall. You can really, you know, you can get a 4-year scholarship. You can do a lot just for being 7 feet tall. And this is what he did. He put a stocking mask over his face. And you remember the 8-ball jackets?
Yes.
He turned his 8-ball jacket inside out, and he robbed this woman at a Mac machine. And then he took the mask off, threw it in the trash, turned the jacket around the right way, and walked down the street. And the cops saw him and put him in the car. And he said, "Well, Dr. Payne, the way the inmates talk, I'm going to beat this case because they say the guy was wearing a mask. How would they know it was me?" I said, "You're 7 feet tall." 7 feet tall.
There aren't too many
He
of
did
them.
not see himself.
Yeah.
He didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And so he didn't see his strength. So my question to a lot of my students is, what is it about you that's 7 feet tall that you don't even see?
Wow.
Everybody has something.
Wow.
What is your greatest strength, right? But by the same token, what is your greatest weakness? Be honest with yourself. Right now, my nephew's on a nuclear sub. And what happens is the sub goes off the coast of some country, sinks down below the water, and stays there for 3 months. Dr. Payne could not do that. I have to see the sun sometimes. That's my vulnerability. I couldn't be underwater for 3 months, but he could do it, you know?
Wow.
So everybody should be honest about your strengths and be honest about your weaknesses. Enhance your strength and shore up your weaknesses. And that's the answer to your question,
That's
how to
good.
make people stronger inside.
Find
Be
out who you
honest.
are.
Yes, find out who you are, you know?
Wow.
The best way to learn about the other people is to learn about yourself.
Yeah.
What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? A lot of people don't do that. They look at other people and they compare themselves to other people rather than looking at themselves, looking within.
Good. That's good. Many people suffer from an inability to handle themselves, and lots of times that leads to bad behavior. Then they go in for counseling to their pastors and other church leaders, and they're ill-equipped to help them to deal with the issues that force the agenda of intervention. I am a very strong proponent of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Oh, very good.
I love that concept. And I think because it serves two purposes. Not only does it deal with the behavior issues, but the why. So I'm really trying to get people to see that it is important to change their thought life and understand where these behaviors come from.
Exactly.
Are mental illnesses genetically disposed or culturally inflicted?
The best answer is both.
Okay.
Some mental health behaviors like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder have genetic components.
Okay.
For example, lithium carbonate. Lithium carbonate compensates for lack of lithium production in the brain. And lithium is a mood stabilizer. So a person might be bipolar because they don't produce enough lithium. And so that's why the doctor prescribed lithium carbonate to kind of balance it.
Right.
So, and that could be have a genetic component. There are other ailments. For example, if a person has a suicidal parent, they are 3 times more likely to commit suicide themselves.
Really?
Yes. Yes. So those are biochemicals inherent and that may be inherited, biochemical issues that may have been inherited. So yes, it can be passed on from parent to child. Yes. Wow. Yeah.
There was some studies that said some people suffer from anxiety and things because of a lack of serotonin in the brain. And, serotonin just helps you sleep better. So are we getting to that reality that we don't get enough sleep?
That's very good. There's all these brain chemicals, acetylcholine esterase, serotonin, dopamine, that they're just bound, and it's called homeostasis.
Right.
They balance. It's almost like body temperature, blood pressure, and those chemicals that neurotransmitters in the brain that stabilize the brain. And sometimes your brain doesn't produce those things. To produce, and something called the SSRI, systematic serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And some people call them selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And they keep your body from absorbing the serotonin, and it gives you a sense of well-being. So each body is unique. Each person is unique. And so each person develops these chemicals and uses them in a different way and different manner. So, and each situation is unique to the person. And that's one of the goals of doing therapy. You have stabilization goals. And when it's almost like triage in the emergency room. You stabilize the patient first. Make sure that they get no worse before they came to therapy than after they leave. Stabilization. The second one is reconstructive, finding weaknesses, shore them up, and find strengths and enhancing them. And the third one is situational, what we're talking about right now. You make your therapy specific to the situation of that particular person. You can't do a cookie cutter image. Well,
That's right.
All black guys are like this, so we're going to use this. No, like you said, CBT works with some, Gestalt therapy works with other one, Rogerian therapy works with other. It's based on what the client brings to the table.
That's true.
Rogerian is very client-centered therapy, and it seems to work very well with certain people. You steer the boat and let them be the engine. Yeah. And so you have to make it situational to the person.
Yeah, it's an interesting field. I think it's
never boring.
It's not.
I would sit at my desk and it'd be like a roller coaster ride. Yeah. Every day was something going on.
Yeah. I focused on forensic psychology, and that's what I have my advanced degree in.
Fantastic.
But I wanted only to deal with teenagers. I wanted to catch them before they became mass murderers. I didn't want to deal with the 40s and 50s guys like you do. I think by then you can't bend the oak tree. So I wanted to deal with those issues. And I had a situation where a mom brought her son to me several years ago, and she says, I want you to help my son. I said, well, what's the problem? He's 12 years old. He cuts the tails off of cats and dogs and has no remorse. I said, we need to get a hold of him.
Right
He's
now.
developing antisocial personality disorder. We need to get a hold of him because it's just going to be a short move from cutting off tails to cutting necks.
Yeah, I agree.
And by the grace of God, we were able to help get him on the right path. But lots of people, particularly in church, they immediately say it's demonic. It's demonic. You want to deal with the devil, cast the devil out of him. But it's not always the same thing. Like you say, it's not cookie cutter.
In my field, we have a saying for people that say that. Say a prayer, but make an appointment.
Yes, that's good.
And so
that's good.
Because God put that person here for a
I
reason.
like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Say a prayer,
That's
you
good.
pray over it. You pray over it, but you make an appointment.
That's great. That's great. Well, Dr. Payne, it's been great to have you with us. We got to have you come back because there's so many other things that I encounter as a pastor. And one thing I always say, theology tells you what people do, but psychology tells you why. And you keep feeding the what to never deal with the why, and you wind up pouring a whole lot of gold into pots that are just broken, and it's going to spill out.
Very well
So
said.
we need to have conversations like this from people like you to say, hey, let's take a moment, let's pause, let's reevaluate and look at the fact that therapy helps. I've had 4 different ones because they all offered different styles. And what I learned about myself was tremendous. I didn't even know. It wasn't like being locked up in a straitjacket.
None at all.
It was tremendous revelation. But I thank you for coming. It's been a joy to have you with us. And
I appreciate
we
it.
will have you back.
Thank you for
But
having
we
me.
thank you for joining us today on Shifting Times to realize that as we move forward in life, you can't keep going down the same road. We have to shift sometimes and begin to think differently. So today we talked about mental health and what you need to do not to only have a saved soul and a healthy body, but you need a healthy mind as well. So thanks for joining us on this great time of discussion with Dr. Carlton Payne. And we pray that you will learn something to help you shift your mind towards a greater place in God. Thanks for joining us.